What if one small act of kindness from a poor teenage girl changed the life of a billionaire family forever? You won't believe how this story unfolds. Amara Bennett woke to the shrill beep of her alarm clock, its chipped plastic frame rattling slightly on the wobbly nightstand. She rolled onto her side and stared up at the ceiling, blinking through the pale morning light, leaking through the torn blinds. Her breath rose faintly in the cold air. The cracked window beside her bed hadn't closed properly in months, and the draft made the thin blanket wrapped around her legs feel more like a suggestion than actual warmth. She sat up slowly. Her muscles ached, not from exertion, but from years of sleeping on a mattress more coil than cushion. She didn't have the energy to pull the blanket back over her. She just sat, motionless for a moment, letting the silence of the apartment press against her. The eviction notice was still sitting on the kitchen table, just a few feet away. Its red letters screamed louder than any alarm clock ever could. Amara tried to look away, but her eyes kept drifting back. 3 days. That's all it said. 3 days, and they would lose what little they had left. Her mother, Monica, had already left hours earlier. She worked the opening shift at the diner on Jefferson Avenue. She left every morning before sunrise and didn't get home until long after the streetlights came on. Monica Bennett didn't complain. She didn't have time to. Everything she did, every ache in her feet, every double shift she pulled was for Amara. The apartment was small. 1 room, a shared bathroom in the hall, and a kitchen that barely qualified as functional. But it was home. The thought of losing it was unbearable. Still, wishing didn't pay rent. And their luck had always been just short of enough. Amara stood up and padded across the cold floor, her bare feet curling against the worn wood. She grabbed the last slice of bread from the counter, dry and stale, but still edible, and chewed slowly, not because she wanted to savor it, but because there might not be anything else until dinner. She glanced at the clock. If she didn't leave now, she'd miss the first bell. That would mean another warning. And warnings piled up, just like late notices. She pulled on the cleanest shirt she had, still creased from where it had hung to dry on the back of a chair. Her jeans sagged at the knees, and the cuffs were fraying. She didn't care. She couldn't. Her backpack, heavy with borrowed books from the public library, was waiting by the door. She slung it over one shoulder, adjusted the strap, and stepped outside. The morning air hit her like a slap, cold, sharp, and full of the smells of the city exhaust, damp pavement, and something fried coming from the deli 2 blocks away. Brookside District was awake. She walked past broken fences and chipped brick buildings, the kind of scenery people learned to ignore if they wanted to keep their heads above water. Old men nodded from stoops. A mother dragged 2 toddlers behind her on the way to the bus stop. Everyone moved with the same rhythm, tired but pushing forward. Amara moved fast. Not fast enough to draw attention, but not slow enough to be seen as a target. That was something she'd learned young. Walk with purpose. Don't look lost. Don't look scared. As she moved out of Brookside and toward the city's heart, everything began to shift. Sidewalks smoothed out, buildings grew taller, cleaner, windows sparkled. The streets here didn't crack beneath your feet. Instead, they gleamed under polished shoes and high heels. She had walked this route every school day for years, and it still caught her off guard. Downtown Eastbridge was another world entirely. One Amara passed through like a shadow. People here didn't see her. Not really. They glanced past her like she was part of the scenery, another blur of motion on their busy path. She kept her eyes down as she walked past Harrington Global's towering headquarters, the glass and steel structure stretching into the sky like a monument to a world she didn't belong to. Men in crisp suits spoke into wireless earpieces. Women in heels that clicked against the marble entryway sipped expensive coffee and didn't look twice at the girl in second-hand sneakers. Amara didn't resent them. Not anymore. She'd grown used to feeling invisible. But some days, that invisibility felt heavier than others. She crossed the final street before school and pulled her jacket tighter around her. The weight of her backpack dug into her shoulders, but it was familiar. Like the weight of everything else she carried, responsibility, fear, and the gnawing hope that somehow things would change. She didn't know that today would be the beginning of that change. She didn't know that just a few blocks ahead, a moment was waiting that would shake everything she thought she knew about the world and her place in it. She just knew she had to keep moving. Because stopping was never an option. Not for girls like her. Amara Bennett adjusted the fraying strap of her backpack as she walked briskly along the edge of downtown Eastbridge. The sidewalk under her feet was cleaner here, the buildings straighter and brighter. Traffic moved in neat lines, and people passed her in a blur of pressed collars and sleek handbags. No one said good morning. No one smiled. That was something you only saw back in Brookside. She kept her gaze low. Not because she was ashamed, but because she had learned to survive this way. You didn't make eye contact in places like this, not when your jacket came from a donation bin and your shoes had been patched with glue twice already. Eastbridge was a city of glass and gloss. People walked like they had places to be and money to make. Amara moved among them like a ghost, unnoticed and unimportant. That suited her fine. She wasn't looking to stand out. She just wanted to get to school, finish her assignments, and do whatever it took to claw her way towards something better. The towering structure of Harrington Global came into view as she rounded the corner, its silver letters gleaming in the morning sun, casting long shadows on the street below. It always made her feel small, not just because of its size, but because of what it represented. Wealth, power, belonging, all things she had never touched. As she approached the crosswalk in front of the building, she instinctively sped up. The faster she moved through this part of town, the less time she had to think about the contrast. The farther she got from the smell of cinnamon toast in corner cafes, the better. But then she saw her. A woman was standing near the steps of Harrington Global, leaning against the metal railing. She looked like she was trying to stay upright, but failing. Her face was flushed, her breathing shallow, and one hand pressed firmly to the side of her rounded belly. She was visibly pregnant and clearly in trouble. Amara froze. Just for a second. She scanned the area, expecting anyone to notice. There were plenty of people around. Businessmen on phones. Security guards posted near the revolving doors. A woman in high heels paused nearby to check her reflection in a compact mirror. But no one moved. No one even asked if the woman was okay. Amara's heart began to thump harder in her chest. She could hear her mother's voice in her head, that constant warning she'd carried for years. People like us don't get second chances in neighborhoods like that. Don't get involved. Keep your head down. She should have kept walking. She should have minded her business. But when the woman's knees buckled and her body began to crumple toward the pavement, Amara didn't think. She ran. Her backpack hit against her spine as she lunged forward. She reached out just in time, catching the woman before she collapsed onto the concrete. The weight nearly dragged her down too, but she held firm, her arms locking around the woman's torso to keep her upright. "Hey, it's okay," Amara said quickly, trying to keep her voice calm. "I've got you." The woman's skin was clammy. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps. One trembling hand clutched her belly, the other gripped Amara's arm like a lifeline. Still, no one helped. Amara looked around, her eyes pleading with the crowd. People stood frozen, watching but not moving. A few looked away. Others simply stared, as if they were watching a scene from a movie instead of real life. "Can somebody please call an ambulance?" she called out, her voice sharp now. A man in a grey suit hesitated, but didn't reach for his phone. A woman wearing earbuds turned the other way. The security guard closest to her started walking toward them, but his expression didn't show concern. It showed suspicion. Amara felt it in her gut before he even said a word. She wasn't being seen as the girl who was trying to help. She was being seen as the problem. The woman in her arms let out a soft, pained gasp. Her knees buckled again, and Amara tightened her grip, straining to hold her up. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Help is coming. You're not alone." But even as she said the words, Amara wasn't sure they were true. Not when no one else was willing to step forward. Not when she could feel the eyes judging her more than they were worrying about the woman whose life was slipping through her fingers. And not when the security guard was now within arm's reach, his hand hovering near the radio on his belt, ready to call someone, not for help, but for backup. Amara took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. She wasn't going to back away. Not now. Not when this woman needed her most. Because even if no one else would do the right thing, she would. The woman in Amara's arms was slipping fast. Her breathing had turned erratic, short and gasping, like she was running out of air. Her hand gripped Amara's sleeve tighter, fingers trembling. Her knees buckled again, and this time it took all of Amara's strength to keep her upright. She looked around once more. Still, no one helped. The businessmen who had streamed out of Harrington Global just minutes ago now stood at a distance, murmuring to one another like this was nothing more than a morning inconvenience. A woman in a pencil skirt stood with her phone raised, not to call for help, but to record. Amara's voice cracked with frustration. "She needs a hospital. Can someone please call 911? A few people flinched at her tone, but no one moved. One man even took a step back, as if her desperation made him uncomfortable. The security guard was closer now, his face hard to read, but his posture rigid. His eyes didn't flicker toward the pregnant woman in pain. They stayed locked on Amara. He raised a hand. "You need to step away," he said sharply. Amara's jaw clenched. "I'm helping her." "She doesn't look like she knows you." "She's barely conscious," Amara snapped. "You can see that, can't you?" The guard's hand moved toward the radio clipped to his belt. I said, "Step back." Anger flared in Amara's chest, not just because he was wrong, but because he didn't care. She had seen that look before, too many times. The look that said, "You don't belong here." That no matter what she said or did, she would always be seen as a threat before she was seen as a person. She shifted her weight and tightened her hold on the woman, who let out a soft groan and leaned further into her. Amara could feel her heart racing against her own chest, frantic and uneven. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" she asked again, gently shaking her shoulder. The woman blinked slowly, lips moving without sound. She looked terrified. Amara turned back to the crowd. "She's going to pass out right here on the sidewalk if we don't get help." Someone finally moved a woman across the street who pulled out her phone and dialed. Her voice was quiet, her eyes darting around as if afraid to get involved. But she spoke into the receiver. It was something. Amara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then she felt the weight shift. The pregnant woman's body sagged more heavily into her arms, her legs giving way completely. Amara sank with her, guiding her down to sit against the railing, trying to cushion the fall. "You're going to be okay," she whispered. "Just stay with me. You hear me?" The woman, Isabel, though Amara didn't know her name yet, managed a shallow nod, but her face was pale, almost grey. A fine sheen of sweat had broken out along her forehead. Her lips parted. "Something's wrong," she breathed, the words nearly lost in the noise of the street. Amara's heart pounded harder. She reached into her backpack, fingers digging past bent folders and worn notebooks until she found the water bottle she'd packed that morning. She twisted the cap and held it to the woman's lips. "Small sips," she said. "Here, just a little." Isabel drank, barely, then gasped and clutched her belly. "Cramps," she whispered. "Bad ones?" Amara's mind raced. "Dehydration? Low blood sugar? Early labor?" She didn't know, but she knew enough to recognize real danger. "Stay awake," she urged. "Talk to me if you can. What's your name?" "Do you have someone I can call?" But the woman only whimpered, eyes fluttering shut again. Amara looked up in time to see the security guard reaching for her shoulder. "I said move back." "Don't touch me," she barked, louder than she meant to. "She's in pain. Can't you see that? I don't know what game you're playing, but this is private property." Amara was about to argue again when a voice cut through the air. "Let her go." The voice wasn't loud, but it stopped everything. It was firm, clear, and carried the kind of authority that didn't require shouting. Amara turned her head. So did the guard. So did half the crowd. A tall man in a tailored suit stood at the top of the marble steps. His presence commanded the space without effort. His face was familiar, not from TV, but from magazines, articles, digital billboards glowing across the city. Graham Harrington, CEO of Harrington Global. Billionaire, power broker, the kind of man whose name moved markets. And his eyes were locked onto the scene unfolding at the base of his company's steps. He wasn't looking at the guard. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at Amara. "Let her go," he said again, more slowly. The guard's hand dropped from his radio. He stepped back, unsure now. Amara didn't move. Her heart was pounding, but she stayed close to Isabel, who was still slumped against the railing, barely breathing. Harrington started walking, and in that instant, everything began to shift. Graham Harrington descended the steps of Harrington Global with a focus that made the city noise fade into the background. The man was known for being calm under pressure, decisive to a fault. But now, as he made his way toward the sidewalk, there was something sharp in his eyes, something personal. He took in the scene in seconds. A teenage girl crouched beside a pregnant woman slumped against the railing. The girl's backpack lay open nearby, schoolbooks spilling onto the pavement. Her hands, steady, despite the fear in her eyes, were gripping the woman's shoulders, keeping her upright. The security guard stood a few feet away, his posture defensive, eyes darting between Graham and the girl. Around them, a crowd had formed, some silent, some recording, all waiting. "Is she your wife?" the girl asked, her voice strained but controlled. Graham nodded once and knelt down beside the woman. "Isabel," he said gently, brushing her damp hair away from her forehead. "It's me. I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, just long enough to register his face. A sound escaped her lips, part breath, part relief. Then she winced, gripping her belly with renewed urgency. Amara shifted back, giving him space, but not too far. Her instincts were still on high alert. "She almost collapsed," Amara explained, her voice quieter now. Nobody was helping her. She could barely breathe. Graham looked at the girl for the first time, not just glanced, but looked. Really looked. There was something raw and unshaken in the way she carried herself, like the panic hadn't taken root in her the way it had in everyone else, like she'd already lived through worse. "You got her off her feet?" he asked. "I caught her before she hit the ground," she replied, brushing sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Tried to keep her talking, gave her water. I don't know what's happening, but it's bad." "It is," Graham said, his voice low. "And if you hadn't stepped in—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Isabel groaned, her fingers clenching the fabric of his suit jacket. Graham turned back to her, his hand steady on hers. "Help is coming," he whispered. "You're going to be okay. Just hang on." As if on cue, the sound of sirens cut through the air. Red and blue lights splashed across the glass front of Harrington Global as the ambulance rounded the corner. Two paramedics jumped out, rushing toward the trio with practiced urgency. "She's been cramping," Amara said as they approached. Breathing was shallow. "She almost blacked out twice." The paramedic raised an eyebrow. "You a med student?" "No," she replied, her voice flat. "Just paying attention." He gave her a short nod of respect and got to work. Graham stood up as they began checking Isabel's vitals. One paramedic radioed in a possible early labor or placental abruption. Graham's jaw tightened at the word. His whole world was right there on that stretcher, his wife, his unborn child. "I'm riding with her," he told the paramedic. "You can follow behind in your car," the medic replied. "We need space in the back." Graham didn't argue. Instead, he turned to one of his assistants, who had just arrived. "Call Dr. Patel. I want him at the hospital when we get there, and make sure they clear a private room." "No delays." The assistant nodded, phone already at his ear. Before the paramedics could lift Isabel fully into the ambulance, she looked up, her gaze searching. "Wait," she whispered, her voice faint but urgent. Graham followed her eyes. They weren't on him. They were on Amara. "Her," Isabel murmured, reaching out weakly. Amara stepped closer instinctively, unsure of what to do. Isabel's fingers brushed hers just a touch, but enough to carry the weight of gratitude neither of them could fully put into words. Then another wave of pain overtook her, and the moment was gone. The ambulance doors closed with a final metallic snap, and the vehicle sped away into traffic. Graham stood there for a second, his tie rustling in the breeze, the roar of the sirens fading behind him. Then he turned back to Amara. "What's your name?" "Amara," she said, swallowing. "Amara Bennett." He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a sleek black card. Gold letters shimmered faintly in the light as he held it out to her. "Come to my office tomorrow." Amara didn't reach for the card right away. "Why?" "You saved my wife," he said simply. "You saved my child." She stared at him, unsure of what to say. She hadn't done it for recognition. She hadn't done it for favors. She had just seen a woman in trouble and moved. Still, her mind flashed back to the eviction notice, to her mother's swollen feet, to the quiet nights filled with worry no one talked about. Her hand closed around the card. Graham gave her one final look, curious, measured, respectful, then turned and walked away. Amara remained rooted to the spot, the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down like gravity. Her fingers curled around the business card in her palm. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But she had a feeling the world had just shifted beneath her feet. Amara Bennett walked home in a daze. The streets of Eastbridge glowed under the fading light, but she didn't see the shine of shop windows or the polished cars rolling past. Her eyes kept drifting to the business card in her hand. She hadn't let go of it since Graham Harrington placed it there, as if it might vanish the second she looked away. She didn't understand what had just happened, how a day that started with stale bread and dread had turned into something so unreal it felt like fiction. And yet, the gold lettering pressed into her palm was solid, tangible, too real to ignore. The farther she walked from downtown, the more the city transformed. High-rises gave way to cracked sidewalks and sagging roofs. The air smelled different, hearless, like perfume and pavement, more like fried food and dust. This was home, Brookside District, where people made do with what they had, and dreams like the one folded in her hand didn't often survive. By the time she climbed the creaking steps to their third-floor apartment, her legs were heavy and her mind was spinning. She opened the door to the familiar scent of canned soup and old wood. The sounds of clinking dishes echoed from the kitchen. "Amara?" her mother called. Monica Bennett stood over the stove, stirring a small pot of soup, her back slightly hunched from a long day on her feet. Her dark curls were pulled back into a tired bun, and her uniform still smelled faintly of the diner's griddle. Amara didn't speak right away. She set her backpack down slowly, as if unsure of what came next. Monica turned, and when she saw her daughter's face, her expression shifted from routine fatigue to quiet concern. "You're late," she said softly, setting the spoon aside. "Everything okay?" Amara hesitated. She could feel the weight of the card still in her hand, now warm from her grip. She pulled it out and placed it carefully on the small, worn table between them. Monica blinked at it, her brows furrowed as she leaned in to read the name. Graham Harrington. She looked up sharply, eyes narrowing with confusion. "Why do you have this?" So Amara told her. All of it. She told her about the woman collapsing near the Harrington building, about how no one else had helped, about the security guard and the way he looked at her like she was trouble just for existing, about holding the woman up, calming her, giving her water and food from her bag, and finally, about Graham Harrington stepping in, about him watching, listening, and handing her this card like it was a key to a door she didn't even know existed. When she finished, the apartment was quiet. Only the soft bubbling of the soup remained. Monica sat down slowly, the weight of the story settling on her shoulders. Her fingers brushed over the card, then pulled back, as if it burned. I don't know what to say, she murmured. I don't either, Amara admitted. He asked me to come to his office tomorrow. For what? I don't know. He said he wants to help. Monica looked at her daughter the way only a mother could, with pride, fear, and a fierce desire to protect her all at once. This kind of thing, she said carefully, doesn't happen to girls like us. And when it does, there's usually a catch. I know, Amara whispered. Her mother's eyes softened. But you helped someone. You didn't do it for money or favors. You just did the right thing. Amara nodded. And I'd do it again. Monica looked down at the card again. Then, without a word, she reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. We'll go together, she said. Amara looked up, startled. I'm not letting you walk into that building alone, her mother continued. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, you don't face it by yourself. For the first time all day, Amara felt a breath of relief. They didn't talk much over dinner. The soup was thin, but it was warm, and they ate in the quiet way families do when they've run out of words, but not out of love. Later that night, Amara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the business card now tucked carefully into her school folder. She could hear the faint hum of traffic, the occasional barking dog, the radiator clicking as it fought to heat the small room. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for once, the fear in her chest didn't drown out the possibility that maybe just maybe life was about to change, and she wasn't going to face it alone. The next morning, Amara Bennett was already awake before the alarm clock buzzed. The weak morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of gold across the wall. But today, the light felt different. She sat up slowly, her mind already racing. The card with Graham Harrington's name still lay where her mother had left it the night before, on the corner of the kitchen table, as if too powerful to touch casually. Just a few square inches of paper, but it held the weight of 1,000 possibilities. Her mother, Monica, was already dressed. Not in her diner uniform, but in the one good outfit she kept for church and job interviews. A simple blouse and a skirt that had been ironed so many times, the seams had softened. Her dark hair had been carefully combed back and pinned with the same clip she wore when she wanted to feel strong. Amara pulled on the only jeans she had, without holes in the knees, and the shirt she'd ironed flat between the pages of a textbook the night before. She tried not to fuss with her hair too much. It wouldn't make a difference anyway, she thought. But Monica stepped in gently, brushing a few curls behind her ears. You ready? Her mother asked. No, Amara admitted, but then added, Yeah, let's go. They walked to the bus stop in silence. The city was just waking up, and the streets of Brookside still carried the sounds of early morning life, dogs barking behind fences, kids calling to each other, and the soft rumble of delivery trucks. But today, Amara felt like she was walking away from all of it just for a moment and towards something she couldn't yet name. The bus ride to downtown Eastbridge felt longer than usual. Amara kept glancing at the seat across from her, where her mother sat holding her purse with both hands, her lips pressed tight. Neither of them said it, but they were both wondering the same thing. What if this was all a mistake? What if it was a joke, a trap, or just a powerful man's fleeting gesture that didn't mean anything at all? But then the sleek towers of downtown began to rise outside the window, and there was no time for second guesses. When they stepped off the bus, Amara felt it immediately. The air smelled different, here cleaner, sharper. The sidewalks were polished, the buildings sparkled, and the people moved fast, dressed like they belonged to some higher order. No one looked at them. Not out of rudeness, but because people in places like this didn't see people like them. They stopped at the foot of the Harrington Global building, its glass front reflecting the early light like a mirror to another world. Amara hesitated. Monica placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let's go." They stepped through the revolving doors. Inside, the lobby was massive. The floor gleamed like still water, and everything was quiet in a way that felt rehearsed. The air smelled like fresh coffee and something expensive Amara couldn't name. There were people in suits everywhere, walking with the kind of urgency that said they had someplace important to be. At the front desk, a woman in a navy blue blazer looked up. At first, she barely registered them until Amara reached into her backpack and pulled out the card. The receptionist's demeanor changed in an instant. "Mr. Harrington is expecting you," she said, suddenly all smiles. "Please, take the elevator to the top floor." Amara exchanged a glance with her mother. "Top floor?" They stepped into the silver elevator, and as the doors slid shut, Amara felt her knees weaken. Her heart pounded with each passing floor. 23, 24, 25. Then the doors opened. The top floor was quiet, softer somehow. A large open space stretched out before them, filled with sunlight and decorated with understated elegance. Glass walls offered a sweeping view of Eastbridge, below, tiny cars, tiny people, a tiny world from up here. At the far end of the room stood Graham Harrington. He wasn't behind a desk. He was near the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone. He looked up as they entered and tucked the phone away. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, walking toward Monica and offering his hand. "Thank you for coming." Monica took it hesitantly, her grip firm despite the nerves in her eyes. Then he turned to Amara. "And Amara, I'm glad you came." Amara managed a nod, unsure if she should speak. "Come on in," Graham said, gesturing toward a seating area with leather chairs and a low table. "Let's talk." As they sat down, Amara could feel it again, the weight of the moment, pressing in from all sides. She didn't know what was about to happen, but she knew one thing for sure. She didn't belong here, but for the first time in her life, someone had opened the door anyway. The silence that followed after they sat down wasn't uncomfortable, it was deliberate. Graham Harrington leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. His sharp eyes flicked from Monica Bennett to her daughter, studying them with the same intensity he likely brought into boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations. Amara sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles white against her jeans. Her mother sat beside her, trying to remain composed, but Amara noticed the small tremble in her fingers. "I won't waste your time," Graham said finally. His voice was calm, confident, the kind of voice that people were used to listening to. "You didn't ask for anything yesterday," he continued, turning his attention to Amara. "But you did something very few people would have done. You saw someone in distress. You acted, no hesitation. You saved my wife. And possibly my child?" Amara opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She didn't know what to say to something like that. Graham turned to Monica. "I understand you've been working at Miller's Diner for several years." Monica blinked. "Yes, sir. 5 years next month." He nodded. "That's an honest job, hard work, but it shouldn't take that kind of toll." She sat up straighter, uncertain how to respond. "It puts food on the table. And it shouldn't be the only option," he replied, pulling a folder from the table in front of them. He slid it across gently. "Mrs. Bennett, I'd like to offer you a full-time position here at Harrington Global. Office support. Benefits. Paid time off, health insurance, a livable wage. Monica stared at him. Are you serious? I don't make casual offers, he said plainly. Her hand hovered above the folder, then rested on top of it. She didn't open it right away. She was still trying to breathe. I haven't worked in an office since I was 20, she said quietly. I don't have a degree. I don't type fast. We can train skills, Graham interrupted gently, but we can't train integrity. That you already have. Monica glanced at Amara. Her daughter was still silent, as if she too was unsure if this was real. I'm not done, Graham added, turning back to Amara. Her stomach tightened. You said you didn't want anything for yourself, he said. That's rare. And to be honest, it's exactly why I want to offer you something. He stood and walked to his desk, retrieving a second folder. He placed it carefully in front of her. A full academic scholarship, he said. Riverside Academy. Amara froze. She had heard of Riverside Academy. Everyone had. It wasn't just a good school, it was the school, the place where Eastbridge's brightest, wealthiest kids went before heading off to Ivy League universities. Getting in was a fantasy. Getting in with full tuition was unheard of. She looked down at the folder, but didn't touch it. What's the catch? She asked. Graham gave a small smile, not mocking, but understanding. No catch, he replied. Just expectations. You keep your grades up, you show up, you don't waste the chance. Amara's throat felt tight. Why me? Because you didn't wait for someone else to do the right thing, he said. You were the only one who didn't walk away. That kind of character is rare. And I don't believe in wasting it. She looked at her mother again. Monica had tears in her eyes, but she was holding them back. She nodded once, silent permission. Amara reached forward and slowly took the folder in her hands. The edges were cool and smooth. The weight of it was unreal. This could change your life, Graham said, but it's your choice. Amara looked up at him. You're giving me a way out. No, he said. I'm giving you a way through. You still have to do the work. Amara nodded slowly. She understood that. She had always done the work. What she'd never had before was a real chance. Amara Bennett stood in front of the towering gates of Riverside Academy with her backpack clutched tightly against her spine and a knot twisting in her stomach. The campus looked like something out of a magazine crawling up the side of sandstone buildings, manicured lawns that looked too perfect to walk on, and students who wore their confidence like tailored jackets. She had barely slept the night before. Even after accepting the scholarship, even after Monica's proud, tear-filled hug, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting to go wrong, that this place, no matter how generous the offer, wasn't built for girls like her. She checked her reflection in a dark window before heading in. Her shirt was clean but faded. Her shoes, while recently scrubbed, were still visibly worn. The other students passed by in polished loafers and brand-new backpacks, their voices bubbling with easy laughter and talk of vacations in Italy and internships at their parents' firms. Amara kept her head down. The receptionist at the front office handed her a schedule and a campus map, offering a polite smile, but not much else. No welcome tour, no mentor, no one to explain where room 312 was or how to get from the science building to the gym in under 5 minutes. She found her first-class advanced English by following a group of students and hoping their route matched hers. When she entered the classroom, the noise didn't stop. No one turned. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and just chose not to react. She took a seat in the back. The desk wobbled slightly. The girl next to her shifted her chair away just an inch, but Amara noticed. The teacher, a tall woman with horn-rimmed glasses and a bright scarf, handed out printed syllabi without acknowledging that anyone new had arrived. Amara stared at the header. Fall term. Literature of the modern age. It felt like a test before she even opened her mouth. The hours passed slowly. Each classroom was filled with whiteboards and smart screens, polished floors and posters advertising clubs she'd never heard of: fencing, rowing, robotics. Between classes, the hallways buzzed with groups of students greeting each other by name, catching up on plans for the weekend. No one made eye contact with her. A few looked her way, but with curiosity, not kindness. The kind that scanned her outfit, her shoes, her silence, and filed it under other. At lunch, Amara stood in the middle of the cafeteria, holding a tray of food she wasn't sure how to pay for. There were no signs. No one to ask. She scanned the tables and saw clusters already formed, laughing, chatting, showing each other videos on their phones. She sat alone. The food was better than anything she'd had in a while: real chicken, not frozen, and actual fresh fruit, but it tasted like cardboard. By her last class, she felt like she was disappearing. That's when a voice startled her from behind. "Hey, you're new, right?" Amara turned to see a boy with dark curly hair and a soft smile standing by the door. He didn't look like the others. His shirt wasn't designer, and his sneakers had the kind of scuffs that came from actual use. "I'm Elijah," he said, holding out a hand. She shook it hesitantly. "Amara? You from around here?" She nodded. "Brookside." Elijah raised an eyebrow, not in judgment, but in recognition. "No kidding." "My cousin lives over there," Amara blinked. "Really?" He laughed. "Yeah. I'm scholarship too. First in my family to get into this place." She didn't know what to say, but something in her chest relaxed for the first time all day. "Look," Elijah said, nodding toward the classroom. "This place can be a lot. People aren't mean, exactly. They just live in their own bubble. But you get used to it." She nodded slowly. "Sit with me tomorrow at lunch," he offered casually, like it wasn't a big deal. "Okay," she said quietly. As they stepped into class, Amara realized something strange. The building, the books, the polished desks, none of that had changed. But that one moment, that small human connection, made it all feel just a little less cold. She wasn't sure she belonged yet, but maybe, just maybe, she could find her place here. It was Thursday afternoon when Amara Bennett's phone buzzed once, then again. The screen lit up with a number she didn't recognize. Normally, she would have let it ring. She wasn't used to receiving calls from anyone but her mother or the school. But something about this number made her pause. She stepped into the empty hallway outside the school library and answered. "Hello?" "Amara," came the voice on the other end, calm, deep, unmistakable. It was Graham Harrington. "I hope this isn't a bad time," he said. "No, it's okay. Is everything all right?" she asked quickly, worry creeping into her voice. There was a brief silence. Then he said, "Isabel's gone into labor, a bit earlier than expected." Amara's breath caught. "Is she okay?" "She's stable." The doctors are monitoring everything, but she asked for you. That stopped Amara cold. Me? Yes. She's at Eastbridge General. I'll send a car. Amara stood in the hallway for several seconds after the call ended, unsure whether she was dreaming. When she finally stepped back inside, Elijah raised an eyebrow from across the table. Everything good? Amara nodded, still trying to process. Think I have to go to the hospital. He blinked. Are you okay? No. I mean, someone I know is. Kinda. She hesitated. I'll explain later. 15 minutes later, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb outside Riverside Academy. The driver opened the door with a quiet, "Miss Bennett?" and she slid in, her school bag still on her shoulder. The car ride passed in silence. As the downtown buildings blurred past the window, Amara stared down at her hands. The idea that someone like Isabel Harrington, rich, elegant, married to one of the most powerful men in the city, would think of her during labor felt almost impossible. But Isabel had reached for her hand that day on the sidewalk. Maybe that moment had meant more than either of them realized. When the car pulled into the private entrance of Eastbridge General, a nurse was already waiting. She led Amara down a quiet hallway lined with frosted glass and muted lights. "Mr. Harrington is inside," the nurse said softly. "You can go in." Amara hesitated for just a breath, then opened the door. The room was warm and bright, filled with the steady beeps of medical monitors and the hum of soft voices. Isabel lay in the hospital bed, her face pale but glowing with the kind of light that only comes after surviving something powerful. Her dark hair was damp with sweat, and her eyes were tired, but they lit up when they met Amara's. "She came," Isabel whispered. Graham stood at the edge of the bed, one hand resting gently on his wife's shoulder. In his other arm, he cradled a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket. "Would you like to meet him?" he asked. Amara nodded slowly, still in disbelief. Graham stepped closer and gently lowered the baby into her arms. He was small, so small, but perfect. His eyes were closed, his mouth making little sleeping movements, his skin warm against her forearm. "He's beautiful," Amara breathed. Isabel smiled faintly. "We named him Julian." Amara blinked, tears pricking unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. Graham watched her carefully, then said, "You were the first person to hold her up when she was about to fall, and now you're one of the first people to hold him. That matters." Amara looked down at Julian again, then back at Isabel, who nodded with emotion too deep for words. "You changed our story," Isabel said. "I wanted you here, because I want him to grow up knowing people like you exist." Amara didn't know how to respond. Her throat was too tight, her chest too full. She handed Julian back, carefully, and stepped back as Graham cradled him again. Before she left the room, Isabel reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "You're not just part of our past, Amara," she said. "You're part of our future." Outside the room, the hallway was quiet again. But inside her heart, something had shifted. Not long ago, she was just a girl trying to get to school on time. Now, she had become a thread in a much bigger story. The next morning, Amara Bennett stood a little straighter as she walked through the gates of Riverside Academy. The buildings were still grand, the marble floors still polished to a shine. The students still walked by in crisp uniforms and expensive shoes. But something inside her had changed. She wasn't pretending anymore. After visiting the hospital, After holding baby Julian and seeing the look in Isabel Harrington's eyes, a look that said you mattered, Amara had felt something stir deep inside her. It wasn't pride. Not yet. It was something quieter, something new. Maybe she did belong here. She passed the same lockers, the same bulletin boards filled with club flyers and Ivy League logos. But today, instead of feeling like an outsider peeking in, she let herself wonder if she could actually be part of it all. She saw Elijah near the courtyard and offered him a small wave. He grinned and jogged over. "You okay?" he asked. "You kind of vanished yesterday." Amara smiled. "Yeah, I had to go to the hospital." He blinked. "You all right?" "Not for me," she said. "Someone I helped had a baby." Elijah looked impressed. "That's definitely a first week of school story." They laughed, and it felt real easy. Like maybe the distance between her and this world wasn't as wide as she'd always believed. In class, when the teacher asked a question about The Great Gatsby, Amara raised her hand. Not because she thought she had the best answer, but because she had an answer, and that was enough. By lunchtime, she walked into the cafeteria without scanning the room for empty tables. She found Elijah and slid into the seat beside him. He was deep in a conversation about a debate club meeting, and without thinking, she leaned in and asked when it was. He didn't blink, just passed her a flyer. After school, Amara stopped by the front office and picked up a form for the mentorship program. She wasn't sure why, but something told her it was time to stop waiting for things to happen to her and start stepping into them. Back at home, the apartment still looked the same. The floor creaked in all the same places. The fridge still hummed with its familiar, off-key buzz. But Monica stood at the kitchen counter with a different air about her. She was reviewing paperwork from Harrington Global, eyes scanning line by line, pen in hand. When Amara walked in, Monica looked up with a soft smile. "You look taller today." "I think I feel it," Amara said with a laugh. They sat at the small kitchen table, the same spot where the business card had once sat like a question too big to answer. Now, they had answers. Not all of them. Not yet. But more than they'd ever dared hope for. Monica reached across the table and touched her daughter's hand. "You know, for a long time, I told myself we just had to survive, that surviving was enough." Amara nodded quietly. "But now," her mother continued, "I think maybe it's okay to want more. For both of us." That night, Amara pulled her Riverside Academy folder from her backpack and opened it. She looked at the scholarship paperwork, the student handbook, the class syllabi. She touched each page like it might vanish, then slowly began to fill out the forms. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about how hard things had been. She was thinking about how far she could go, not because someone had handed her a shortcut, but because someone had believed in her when it mattered. And now, she was starting to believe in herself too. The poster had been on the bulletin board for a week before Amara finally stopped in front of it. Spoken Word Club, find your voice, speak your truth, Thursdays at 4 p.m, room 204. She didn't know what made her linger that afternoon. Maybe it was the way the words felt like they had been written just for her. Maybe it was the fact that for the first time in her life, she had more to say than silence could hold. She tore off one of the paper tabs with the meeting info and tucked it into her backpack without telling anyone. On Thursday, she walked the halls of Riverside Academy with that tab balled up in her pocket like a secret. Her heart beat faster with each step closer to room 204. She thought about turning back at least twice, but something inside her, a quiet push, steady and stubborn, kept her moving forward. When she opened the door, the room was already buzzing with energy. A small circle of students sat on mismatched chairs, some with notebooks open, others just listening. A senior boy, with dreadlocks and a deep voice, was performing a piece about his father, and the first time he realized what fear looked like. The words were raw, honest. They didn't ask for attention, they demanded it. Amara hovered near the door, unsure if she should step in or quietly slip away. Then someone noticed her. "You're welcome to join," said a girl with round glasses and an encouraging smile. Amara nodded and took a seat near the back, her notebook still closed. They listened to a few more performances. Some were loud and fiery, some soft and trembled like leaves in the wind. No one was perfect, but no one had to be. When the club leader asked if anyone new wanted to share, Amara felt her throat tighten. She shook her head. But the next day, she started writing. It wasn't a poem at first, just thoughts, fragments. Memories of that morning on the sidewalk, the feeling of being judged before anyone knew her name, the weight of silence, the heat of someone finally seeing her. Each line poured out faster than the last. By the next meeting, she had a page filled front and back. She didn't raise her hand right away, but halfway through, as another student finished a piece about growing up between two cultures, Amara felt her fingers twitch. She reached into her bag, pulled out the notebook, and stood. She didn't look at anyone as she walked to the front, just unfolded the paper, her hands shaking slightly. And then she read. Her voice was quiet at first, but as the words came out about hunger, about sidewalks that didn't belong to her, about the weight of kindness and the fear of stepping out of line, her voice grew. She didn't perform. She spoke. When she finished, there was a long pause. Then applause, not the polite kind, but the kind that wraps around you like a warm coat. Someone whispered, "Wow." Someone else said, "That was real." Amara sat back down, with her heart pounding in her ears. But she didn't feel scared anymore. She felt heard. After the meeting, the club advisor, a literature teacher named Mr. Lawson, stopped her at the door. "That was your first time?" he asked. She nodded. "Well, I hope it won't be your last." She smiled, small, but real. That night, she showed the poem to her mother. Monica read it 3 times, her eyes misty, then pulled Amara into a hug that said more than words could. "You've always had something to say," Monica whispered. "I'm glad you're starting to say it." In the days that followed, Amara found herself walking through the school with a little more confidence. She joined 2 more clubs debate and student voices. She spoke up in class. She even helped another new student find the science building without being asked. She was still Amara from Brookside, still the girl who carried the weight of hard years in her eyes. But now, she was also something more. She was a girl who had found her voice, and she was no longer afraid to use it. The air in Brookside was colder than usual for late fall. The trees that lined the cracked sidewalks had begun to shed their leaves, scattering amber and rust-colored memories across the ground. Amara Bennett stood at the corner where it had all started. It had been months since that morning, since she'd run down this very sidewalk, trying not to be late for school, hoping not to draw attention. She remembered the cold bite of hunger in her stomach, the weight of her worn backpack, and the feeling that life had no interest in giving her anything other than hard edges. And then the woman collapsed. Everything after that had unfolded like a story she could barely believe had been her own. Now, standing in the same spot, the memories flooded back in pieces. The moment her hands caught Isabel Harrington before she hit the pavement, the desperate shouts for help that no one answered, the weight of judgment in the eyes of a security guard, and the voice that cut through it all. "Let her go," Graham Harrington's voice. That moment hadn't just changed the course of a bad morning. It had changed the course of a life. She looked up at the gleaming glass tower of Harrington Global, still rising like a monument over the city. It hadn't changed. But she had. Back then, she'd passed by this building almost every day, head down, invisible to the world inside. Now, she had a school ID in her bag that granted her access to places she once thought were meant for someone else. She had mentors who listened when she spoke, friends who saw her for who she was, a future that no longer felt like a locked door. Her mother had started her new job 3 months ago. Office assistant, regular hours. A desk with her name on it, benefits, paid holidays. They'd even started looking at a better apartment, one with a washer that actually worked and no leak in the ceiling. And Amara? She had just been asked to read one of her poems at the school assembly next week. The girl who once couldn't find her voice had now been invited to share it. A quiet smile tugged at her lips as she stepped off the curb and walked past the bench where she used to wait for the bus. A boy sat there, hood pulled up, sketching in a spiral notebook. He looked up as she passed, and she offered a nod. Not much, but enough to say, "I see you. I've been there." She crossed the street and found herself standing in front of the same metal railing where Isabel had leaned that day. The memory was sharp how pale she'd looked, how no one had stopped, how Amara had felt like she was standing in a world that refused to move unless someone forced it to. She rested her hand on the railing. "You all right, miss?" a voice asked gently. She turned and saw a security guard, young, unfamiliar, kind eyes. He wasn't the same one from that morning, but his presence still made her heart twitch for a second before settling. "I'm okay," she said, with a soft nod. "Just remembering something." The guard tipped his head respectfully and walked on. Amara stayed a moment longer, watching people pass by. Suits, briefcases, fast steps, focused eyes. They still didn't notice her, but now it didn't make her feel small. It made her feel powerful. Because she didn't need to be seen by everyone, she only needed to see herself. She pulled her phone from her bag and opened the message thread with her mom. A new text had just come in. "Got the job offer for the front desk supervisor position. Interview next week. Dinner tonight is on Menno Ramen, I promise." Amara grinned and typed back, "Proud of you. Can't wait. I'll bring dessert." She slipped the phone away and took one last look at the sidewalk, the railing, the street that used to feel like an obstacle course. Now it felt like a beginning. Amara turned toward downtown and started walking, shoulders back, chin up, heart open. She had once thought she needed a miracle to escape the life she was born into. But what she really needed was the moment she chose to step forward. And now, she wasn't just walking to school. She was walking into the life she had claimed for herself. The story of Amara Bennett reminds us that small acts of kindness can open doors we never imagined. In a world that often rewards status and power, Amara had neither just a compassionate heart and the courage to help someone in need. That moment, born out of instinct and empathy, changed the course of her life. For older Americans who have seen decades of change, this story reaffirms a timeless truth. Doing the right thing still matters. It's not about wealth or recognition. It's about character. Amara didn't wait for permission to act. She simply did what was right. And in return, she found not only opportunity, but a sense of worth she hadn't known she carried. As we move through life, especially in our later years, it's easy to wonder whether small gestures still make a difference. This story says they do. Whether we're helping a neighbor, encouraging a grandchild, or standing up for someone unseen, our choices ripple outward. Sometimes, one moment of compassion is all it takes to begin a whole new chapter.